All right, folks, so this is the brand new Garmin Fenix 8, and this brings some pretty interesting new functionality to their flagship outdoor-focused sports watch, like increased durability, dive functionality, a speaker or microphone, as well as big changes to their user interface. And the Fenix 8 actually isn't the only new watch that Garmin's launching today, so they're also announcing their new Enduro 3 as well as their new Fenix E, and more details on those in just one bit. But I also have a super in-depth review of the Enduro 3, which I'll have linked down in the description below, which you can check out once you're done over here. So I've been testing the new Fenix 8 out for quite some time now, and I've got some actual real-world data to show you over my testing over the last few weeks for stuff like gravel and road biking, to mountain biking, to running, hiking, as well as even weight training, just so you can get an idea of heart rate accuracy, GPS accuracy, elevation accuracy, how it does for navigation, and how it just does as an everyday watch. And if you do happen to find the information in this video to be useful, do me a quick favor and just hit that like button down below. So it's getting a little bit windy out here, so we're gonna switch locations because we have a lot to talk about with the new Fenix 8. Okay, so starting with the hardware, so just like the Fenix 7 and the Fenix 7 Pro, the Fenix 8 comes in three sizes. So we still have the largest 51mm version, we have the mid-size 47mm version, but they changed things slightly for the smallest version where they bumped that size up to 43mm versus 42 from before. And then the other change is that they dropped the X and the S names for the largest and the smallest versions. They're just now the 51, the 47, and the 43. The other big change though is that they've merged the Epix lineup into the Fenix lineup, which I think makes a lot of sense since the Epix was just an AMOLED version of the Fenix. Feature-wise, they are nearly identical, so now the Fenix 8 comes in memory and pixel solar version as well as an AMOLED version, dropping the Epix name, which I think is going to clear up a lot of confusion. So now with the Fenix 8, you basically have two things to choose, your size and your display preference, but one thing to note is that they're not offering a 43mm memory and pixel solar option, and they say that is due to the stack of the display and the solar panel where they're kind of limited in terms of the size that they can actually put into that 43mm version. However, they were able to cram larger AMOLED displays into the 43mm version as well as the mid-size 47mm version, where the 47mm version actually has the same 1.4-inch display as the largest 51mm size. So I think that was kind of interesting. Now, although the size of the memory pixel solar displays are the same size as before, they've actually increased the solar efficiency of the solar ring that goes around the display. Interestingly though, they've actually gone away from that translucent solar panel that goes on top of the display. And the reason for this is that it's supposed to increase readability and clarity of the display. So it should have a little bit more contrast and be easier to see. So I've been primarily testing the Fenix 7 AMOLED, so that's what I'm going to be primarily showing you in this video, but make sure to subscribe to the channel for a follow-up of the Fenix 8 Solar, which will be coming up in the future. And then really quick before we get into the rest of the details of the Fenix 8, I also wanted to really quickly talk about their other new releases today, the Fenix E as well as their Enduro 3. So the Fenix E comes with a lot of core features of a Fenix, like a rugged build, but it doesn't come with some of the new features of a Fenix 8. Like it doesn't have a speaker and microphone, it doesn't have dive functionality, it comes with Garmin's 4th generation heart rate sensor versus their 5th generation sensor, it has less memory on board, and it only comes in a 47mm AMOLED version, and the AMOLED display is 1.3 inches versus 1.4 inches of the Fenix 8. So you can basically think of the Fenix E as kind of like an Epix Gen 2 with some of the new software features of the Fenix 8, but at a price of $799, it may be all the watch that you need, and you can put a little bit more cash in your pocket. And with their new Enduro 3, so this is their new battery life king with potentially unlimited battery life depending on how much sun that you get. So this is going to be for that ultra endurance athlete that doesn't want to just record an outdoor activity for a couple days, but potentially a couple weeks. But just like the Fenix E, it isn't necessarily a Fenix 8 either. So it doesn't come with a speaker and microphone. It doesn't have dive functionality. However, it does come with pretty much all the new software features, and it also does get an upgraded heart rate sensor to the 5th generation Elevate heart rate sensor with ECG. Oh, and they did also improve the solar efficiency on the Enduro 3, just like the Fenix 8 Solar, and it does also have the display that's a little bit more readable than before. And I've actually been testing the Enduro 3 and the Fenix 8 AMOLED kind of side by side over the last couple of weeks, so I should add my in-depth review of the Enduro 3, which should be dropping at the same time as this video, which you can check out once you're done over here. Okay, so back to the Fenix 8 though. So for the hardware on the outside, the Fenix 8 looked pretty similar to the previous generation, but they now have a new sensor guard on the right-hand side of the case surrounding the barometer as well as one of the microphones. However, there's a pretty big change with the buttons where these are now what they're calling leak-proof buttons. What exactly does that mean? Well, buttons traditionally need a hole in the case where the buttons make contact with the internals. These are actually wireless buttons where they're using the inductive sensor versus something physical. And it's actually the same kind of technology that they use in their Descent Mark III dive watch, which is also why the Fenix 8 are now dive capable. Not quite to the level of their Descent Mark III, but we'll talk about those specifics here in just one bit. One interesting thing to note about these new buttons though is that they definitely feel different than the previous generation, where the previous generation had a nice like physical click to them where these are positive and they also give haptic feedback, but it's not quite as satisfying as that physical click from before. And it's definitely taken some getting used to over the last couple of weeks, and I'm totally fine with it, but I do tend to prefer the physical click from the buttons before. But one of the big reasons and benefits to those leak-proof buttons is that the Fenix 8s are also dive capable for recreational single gas diving down to 40 meters, and it also does come with a snorkeling profile. They actually still have the same 10 ATM water resistance rating from the previous generation, but they're now EN 13319 certified. So it's not like a full dive watch like their Descent Mark III, but it does add dive functionality to their Fenix lineup, which I think is a great addition. Like for me, I'm not a serious scuba diver, but I may want to do it from time to time, but I definitely couldn't justify ever getting a Descent Mark III because I'm not that dedicated to diving. But if I were in a location where I wanted to dive, like I just was in Spain, I may want to give it a shot. So that's great that it has this functionality, and it also gives important details like your surface intervals as well as time to fly. Now shifting to battery life. So battery life is actually increased for their 47mm version as well as their 51mm version, and I'm talking about both AMOLED as well as solar. However, the smallest version, the battery life is about the same, but one thing to consider though is that the smaller version does get a bump in display size, so there are some battery efficiency improvements across the board. But for how that actually pans out in the real world though, so I've been primarily using the 47mm Fenix 8 AMOLED with the always-on display on for both daily use as well as workouts. I've had the display brightness at 2/3, and I've also been using SpO2 for sleep. And I've been recording about 60 to 90 minutes of workouts per day, and I've been getting right around that 7-day mark. Battery life will, of course, depend on what kind of settings that you use as well as how many outdoor activities that you track, but I think it's hitting that mark pretty well. And then when it comes to battery life for recording outdoor activities, this will again depend on your scenario, but the Fenix 8 AMOLED was right on track where it was getting at or even more than their claims. Now, for the most taxing scenario though, when it comes to battery life, this is where you're going to be using a route for navigation. You have it on the map page, and this is where you will see significantly more burn, but you can probably basically expect somewhere in between based on whatever you're doing. But when it comes to battery life for the memory pixel solar Fenix 8s, again, I've been concentrating my testing on the Fenix 8 AMOLED as well as the Enduro 3 over the last couple of weeks, but make sure to be on the lookout for an update on the Fenix 8 memory pixel solar version, which will be coming up in the future. Another big hardware change though with the Fenix 8s is that they now have a speaker and microphone, and this is just for taking calls on the watch or accessing a voice assistant. You can actually use voice commands with the Fenix 8 to do stuff like starting an activity, skipping tracks, setting timers, setting alarms, accessing specific widgets, saving waypoints, quite a bit really, and you'll access the voice commands with a hotkey, and they have it set up where you'll long press the upper right hand key for the voice commands.
Start a run. Set a timer for 7 minutes. Stop the timer. Turn on sleep mode. Turn off sleep mode.
Now, I think the voice commands can come in handy depending on your situation, but you still do have to press a button to access these. So it's not like a hands-free voice command like you could do on an Apple Watch or something like that. So I think the usefulness of this is going to kind of vary on your situation. So like for me, I don't think I'd ever like want to start a run or anything like that where I kind of just have the muscle memory to do that. But I can definitely see the usefulness of this being great for stuff like setting a timer or setting an alarm. And then another thing that you can do with the microphone is that you can actually take geotagged voice notes, which I think is kind of an interesting feature. Now, these voice notes are going to just live on the watch itself where you have to plug it into your computer to pull off those notes. But in the future, they will have some sort of way to access these using the Garmin Connect app. And then just like their Venue 3, you can use the speaker and microphone to take calls on the watch itself as long as your phone is in range.
YOLO. You sound pretty good. Let me turn up the volume just a little bit. All right, speak. Yeah, and definitely don't call me soft.
And then you can also access your voice assistant of choice. And then you can also even listen to music that's stored on the watch itself. The quality, of course, is a speaker that's on a watch, but I suppose you can do that in a pinch. And then the speaker also adds little touches to the user interface where there's tones and chimes throughout versus just beeps, whether those are going to be notifications for text, starting and stopping activities, lap alerts, navigation alerts. It's just a little bit more friendly now. Now, when it comes to responding to text, so you can respond to text if you're on an Android phone with like predefined responses, but if you have an iPhone, you're limited there because Apple actually limits text reply functionality to just Apple Watches. But Garmin has a little bit of a workaround for this since it can't access the Siri voice assistant, or you can use Siri to respond to a text, but they now made it a little more seamless where you can actually respond directly from the notification itself. Again, it's not quite as seamless as using an Apple Watch, but they're definitely trying. Another big thing that they're rolling out with the Fenix 8 is a revamped user interface. Now, Garmin has a big problem. They collect a lot of data, arguably more than any other watch out there, especially on their flagship watch. So they've come out with this new user interface standard or theme moving forward with new watches. So the Fenix 8 will have this, the Fenix E, as well as the Enduro 3. I did, of course, ask them about previous generation watches, and they said that this is going to be primarily a moving forward type of thing. So first off, they've now added much more customization for the text size on the watch itself. In fact, it's actually during the setup process whether you choose the font size of your choice. Before, it was just like standard or large, but now there's just a lot more options. But for the bigger changes though, so starting with widgets and notifications. So if you press the down button, here's where you can cycle through all your widgets just like before. However, the big change though is that from the watch face, if you press the up button, and now it goes directly to what they're calling a notification center, where it has notifications for texts, calls, and apps. Now, I know some of you may already be typing a comment down in the comment section down below, but don't worry, you can actually turn off this notification center where you can go back to the traditional using the up and down buttons to loop through all the widgets. They've also tweaked a lot of the actual widgets themselves where they've taken advantage of the screen real estate with information that fills the widgets a lot more. So for example, a lot of the charts and graphs have a lot more scale to them, and there's also a little bit more color and kind of like vibrancy throughout. And there's also some pretty big changes with activities, but one more kind of general change to the UI is that they now have a temporary touch unlock feature, which I think this is pretty awesome. So before it was just basically touchscreen on or off. With the new temporary touch unlock feature, the touchscreen will actually lock when you're not interacting with the watch, and all it takes is just a quick swipe from the top to unlock it. And then in terms of sport profiles, just like the previous generation, it comes with basically anything that you can think of to track, from running to cycling, plenty of outdoor recreation profiles, there's winter sport profiles, water sports, plenty of gym profiles, and then now it of course has snorkeling as well as scuba diving down to 40 meters. So that's the general day-to-day interface, but when it comes to activities and the start button, this also has some pretty big changes here as well. So this new interface is basically separated out into two sections, activities up top and then other apps and functions down below. With the activities section, there's two ways that you can have this set up. So you can have an activities folder right here where you can go in, then access all the activities that you've chosen. But they also allow you to pin a couple primary activities up here as well. So if you primarily run and bike, you can have those first up and then have the rest of the activities in the activities folder down below. And then another thing they've added is the ability to access other activities without you actually having to permanently save them to your activity list. So now let's say you have the hankering to go snowshoeing or something like that, but you don't think you'll necessarily do it again. Rather than have to have that snowshoe activity live in your activity list, you can just quickly access it once by going to more, down to snowshoe, and then you don't necessarily have to always have it in your list of activity profiles. And then backing out of activities, so below that, there's going to be apps and other functions like accessing the voice commands, maps, phone functions, music, map manager, and then other apps and functions that aren't necessarily individual activities. And then another huge change with activities is that the activities themselves have now a new concept called activity stages. And this is kind of interesting new direction when it comes to starting an activity. So what happens now is that when you start an activity, is that they have three different stages or lanes. So the first stage or lane is your start stage where you can see your GPS signal strength, as well as any sensors are paired with your watch. Basically the same as before. Below that, you have options based on that profile, like any daily training suggestions. You have a training menu that has all your workouts and any training related features like pace per or power guide. Then below that, there's navigation with courses. There's activity settings like configuring data pages. And then finally, you can access watch settings. And then if you swipe over to the right, here's the data pages for that particular activity. And then if you swipe again, there's also a stage for music controls. And this is the same, by the way, as your starting activity as well as during your activity. So if you've already started an activity, you can swipe to left or right and access those different stages. And how this is different than before is that when you started an activity, you had the start page, and then below that were the data pages. And then to access training, navigation, or other watch settings, you press the middle left-hand button. And then to access music, you have to long press the down button. So there's things I definitely like about this new concept, but there's also things that I'm not sure are necessary. So I love the fact that the options for training and navigation are directly accessible through the start page. That makes a lot of sense to me, and I totally dig it. The left to right swiping though of each of those individual stages, I haven't necessarily found myself using it all that much, if at all for that matter. I do like the fact that it's trying to organize core functions that you likely want to access during activity, like accessing settings or changing sports on the left, and then music controls on the right, but it doesn't necessarily translate intuitively to the button. So to access the left stage, you actually long press the middle left-hand button, which is actually pretty much the same as before. And to access the music controls, you'll actually long press the down button. But if you press the up and down buttons, just like a short press, you'll still access the different pages. So it's definitely a little bit confusing to use buttons to access the different stages. And then on the mapping side of things, so they've updated the map page a bit with a new map scale indicator up top using a radius versus a straight line. And then you can also quickly toggle track up and north up with this little button right here. The map scale indicator does change with each view. And then they've also added an easier way for you to toggle on and off different map layers directly from the map screen. And another change is that they have a new navigation interface that can be accessed with this little burger menu icon using the start key when you're on the map page. And I quite like this change for the most part, where instead of you having to long press the middle left-hand button to access a lot of these navigation controls that you'd likely want to use from the map page, you can just quickly access all of these using the start key. And then I definitely mentioned this before, is that the new temporary touch unlock feature does also work here during activities, and it is definitely useful when on the map page, of course, where you can temporarily unlock it to do all the mapping functions, which is just way easier to do with touch versus buttons. And then it'll just lock again after you've stopped interacting with it. And then when it comes to navigation, there's also some new additions here as well, where they've redesigned the menus a bit, where these are a bit more organized with recent routes, saved routes, and searching for a location. They also have a new dynamic round trip routing feature where you can specify your target distance, it will create a course, and then you just go on your run. And then what you can do is you can deviate from your run and kind of go explore or something like that, and then it'll actually dynamically update your turn-by-turn instructions based on your desired distance. And then there's also some pretty big updates for ski maps for skiing and snowboarding. So ski maps already have quite a bit of information on Garmin devices like chairlifts and ski runs, as well as their difficulty rating, but they're actually going to be leveraging that information to give you more detailed stats after you save your activity. So what they're going to be doing now is actually using your GPS data to snap it to the closest runs and then give you more detailed stats after you save your activity. So it's actually going to break down your difficulty rating of all the runs that you've done in a day. And this is very similar to what the Slopes app does on an Apple Watch. And then on the strength training side of things, they're also going to be rolling out long-term strength training plans to hit specific goals, as well as sport-specific strength training plans, like let's say for running or cycling. And that's something that I'm definitely going to be looping back in another video, so definitely stay tuned. And then on the GPS accuracy side of things, well, there's really no surprises here with the Fenix 8, where it performs just as well as the Fenix 7 and Fenix 7 Pro, where it does have a multi-band or dual-band satellite chipset, where it also does have a Sat IQ mode, where it can actually automatically switch between different modes based on your satellite signal. Okay, so starting out with a half road, half gravel ride, so incredibly close between all devices for the total distance, even for a longer activity. And the elevation gain also looked really good on this ride compared to the other devices, as well as a corrected elevation figure in Strava. And then taking a look at the GPS tracks, well, this is basically picture perfect. I mean, I can kind of pan through this entire ride and you can see that the tracks are super, super crispy. Now, that was kind of an easier test though, since it was kind of out in the wide open with a lot of straight sections. But now let's check out a mountain bike ride where things get a bit more challenging. When it comes to the total distance, pretty good here again. And again, the elevation gain looks solid. When it comes to the GPS tracks, starting off, all of them are doing really good, although the device in purple was just a hair off the trail, but not really a big deal. The Fenix 8 did take this section right here a little bit wide though, nothing crazy, but just a hair off. But if we take a look at all the other tight corners and switchbacks though, it did really well and stays super, super tight. Now for the hardest GPS test that I probably did though, this run right here was through some very tight streets in the coastal town in Spain, and the total distances were relatively close, although the Chorus Vertex 2S was just a smidge low. And then taking a look at the GPS tracks, I wouldn't necessarily say any of them were perfect, but none of them had a gigantic failure either. But again, these were some really crazy tight streets and alleys and kind of a nightmare for GPS accuracy in general. We see at the beginning that the Epix Pro and the Vertex 2S got a tiny bit off track, and then the Enduro 2 went a little bit wide on this corner right here, and as well as this corner right here. And then after that, it's pretty good for the most part. However, here's where the streets got really, really tight. And we see that the Vertex 2S and the Enduro 2 got a bit off track. And then right here, we see that the Fenix 8 actually went a little bit wide, and the Vertex 2S cut in on the corner. Again, it's a really hard test for all these devices, and none of them did perfect, but all of them did also do a reasonable job. And then when it comes to heart rate accuracy, just like GPS, the Fenix 8 has the same hardware as the Fenix 7 Pro with their 5th generation heart rate sensor, which does also have ECG capabilities in select countries. But for the actual accuracy, I got pretty solid results here from the Fenix 8. So like on this indoor ride here with some pretty steady state sections as well as some intervals, it's actually kind of hard to tell the difference between the Fenix 8 and the chest and arm heart rate monitors I was using as references. And then for running, the Fenix 8 did a pretty good job here as well, where it matched up well with the other devices. It was a couple seconds behind on some of these peaks right here and a little bit under right here at the end, but other than that, that's pretty good. And then for road biking and gravel biking, this is where you will start to introduce more variables for wrist-based optical heart rate sensor to deal with, like vibrations and bumps on the road, which can make a watch bounce on your wrist, leading to inaccuracies. But the Fenix 8 held its own pretty well here. A couple blips here or there, which can be expected, but really good stuff overall. It did, however, take a little bit right here to track the increase in heart rate after I came to a stop, but other than that, it's pretty solid. Now, when it comes to weight training and high-intensity interval training, this is kind of the holy grail for wrist-based optical heart rate sensors based on a lot of the gripping onto the dumbbells as well as a lot of varying arm movement. But the Fenix 8 did a pretty decent job. It definitely did have some hiccups like on these sets of bench presses right here at the beginning, as well as read a little bit high these shoulder flies right here, but it did track the high-intensity intervals at the end extremely well. So there's no denying that the Fenix 8 is their best flagship watch yet, but it also does come with a price increase and an even bigger price increase if you want the Memory Pixel Solar version. And it comes with more features, so the price increase does make sense if you're comparing the prices when they were new. But now that these are out, I'm pretty sure that the Fenix 7 Pros as well as the Epix Pros are going to get discounted. In fact, we've seen some recent sales on those. So if we're comparing the prices when they're new, you're basically paying about $100 to $200 more for the dive functionality, the speaker and microphone, as well as the new user interface. Other than that, the Fenix 8 and the Fenix 7 Pro / Epix Pro are essentially the same watch. So if the previous generation watches do get discounted, which I'm pretty sure they will at some point, that's going to be an even bigger gap for these new features. And that's kind of a harder pill to swallow considering that the previous generation watches are already very capable watches. And don't get me wrong, the Fenix 8 is definitely an amazing watch, but the Epix Pro and the Fenix 7 Pro, they still do like nearly everything that this watch does except for the dive functionality as well as the speaker and microphone, which are definitely nice to have, but I'm not sure those are a gigantic leap from the previous generation. Anyhow, those are just my thoughts on the Fenix 8, but I definitely want to hear what you think as well. Go ahead and leave your comments down in the comment section down below, and if you found the information in this video useful, do me a favor and quickly hit that like button, and also subscribe to the channel for a lot of follow-up videos around these watches that are coming soon. In the meantime, thanks so much for watching, and we will see you in the next video.